Okay, did not just try now. Good.
Cain. The Bible's first act of murder was committed by Cain. He was the eldest son of Adam and Eve, a farmer who worked the land, while his younger brother Abel was a shepherd. When they each brought an offering to God, Abel gave the best of his flock, but Cain only brought some of his crops. God accepted Abel's sacrifice but rejected Cain's, and jealousy burned within him. God warned Cain to resist the anger in his heart, but Cain refused. He invited Abel out into a field, and there he attacked and killed him.
To be honest, the reason why God rejected Cain's sacrifice is still debated till this day. Because I think most people, including me, think that he didn't choose the best. Meanwhile, Abel did choose the best. Well, some people were wondering about one other thing like that. We once spoke about it during devotion with my family. We have that every night. Spoke about that.
It was the first human life taken, not by accident or in battle, but out of envy. When God asked where Abel was, Cain lied, replying with the cold words, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But Abel's blood cried out from the ground, and Cain was cursed to live as a restless wanderer, cut off from the
My brother's keep.
land he once farmed. This was the beginning of human violence, showing how jealousy and anger can turn into evil and destroy families. Judas Iscariot. The most infamous betrayal in history was carried out by Judas Iscariot, though he was one of Jesus' own disciples.
I've had. Sorry about that.
He sold his master to the chief priests for 30 pieces of silver. On the night of the arrest, Judas led soldiers into the Garden of Gethsemane. To single Jesus out, he marked him with a kiss, a symbol of friendship twisted into treachery. Jesus was seized and led away to trial and death. Racked with guilt, Judas tried to return the money, admitting he had betrayed innocent blood.
To be honest, I believe we all know this story. In fact, there's even a time named after him, and it's not a good thing. Like there's literally nothing good said about Judas or what he did. You also need to understand logically why did he do it? Was it for money? This guy literally brought people back from the dead. What did you think was going to happen?
But the priests refused, so he hurled the silver into the temple and hanged himself in despair. Judas's betrayal was more than treason against a friend. It was a direct strike against the Son of God, making his name forever a symbol of a dark kind of evil. The Pharaoh of the Exodus. The cruel oppression of Israel reached its height under this Pharaoh. He enslaved God's people, forcing them into non-stop labor to build his empire. When Moses confronted him with God's command to release
Wait, hold on, let me check for some. Yes. Was Ramses the second? At least from what I've heard, had Moses actually knew Ramses, and in fact, we're kind of brothers. At least that's what I heard. If you guys have watched the Prince of Egypt movie, you'd understand too. Was Yeah, there's like this entire backstory between them. Just didn't.
Israel, Pharaoh responded with open defiance and refused to listen. God answered with 10 plagues that struck the heart of Egypt, from rivers turning to blood, swarms of insects and locusts, to extreme darkness that engulfed the nation. With each disaster, Pharaoh's heart only grew harder that even after the death of every Egyptian firstborn, his change of mind was only temporary. Once the Israelites were gone, Pharaoh gathered his army and pursued them to the Red Sea, determined to bring them back into bondage. But God opened the waters for his people, and then released them on Pharaoh's chariots, drowning his soldiers and ending his reign of terror. This is a clear example of pride hardened into evil, a ruler whose defiance against God brought devastation on his nation and destruction on himself. Jezebel. She is remembered as one of the most evil women in the Bible.
She is the most evil woman in the Bible. She's so evil that she's used as a term for evil woman. I can actually believe that.
Jezebel was a Phoenician princess who married King Ahab of Israel and used her position to spread the worship of Baal, a pagan god worshipped by the Canaanites, and whose cult often involved ritual prostitution and child sacrifice. Under her influence, prophets of the Lord were hunted down and killed, while hundreds of pagan priests were put in their place. Her wickedness was not limited to worshipping false idols. When Ahab desired the vineyard of a man named Naboth, Jezebel plotted his death. She arranged false accusations and had him executed so the king could take his land. It was murder.
Till this day, this story still annoys me. I've heard this story my whole life, and I still get angry when I hear it.
Carried out through deceit and abuse of power. Because of her crimes, a prophecy declared that Jezebel would die in disgrace, her body devoured by dogs. The prophecy came true when she was thrown from a window and left for animals to consume. Her name has become a symbol of cruelty and corruption, a warning of how far evil can go when power is abused. Athaliah, one of the bloodiest rulers in Judah's history. Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, brought the same ruthless ambition into David's royal line. When her son, King Ahaziah, was killed, Athaliah seized the throne for herself. To secure her power, she ordered the massacre of the royal family, killing her own grandchildren to eliminate any heirs. Only one infant, Joash, was hidden away and spared from the slaughter. For 6 years, Athaliah ruled, promoting Baal worship and filling the land with corruption. Her reign ended when the priest Jehoiada revealed that Joash had survived.
I just want to know something. If you guys actually study the Old Testament deeply, you realize if there's one thing God hates the most, it's child sacrifice. And almost any culture that has child sacrifice, God has them executed. And that includes like complete ethical cleansing. No one is left alive. That practice. Because he didn't want anything like that touching the people, the children of Israel. He did not want that to exist. Just shows that it just shows God's love and care when it comes to children. I think I kind of hold that sentiment.
The boy was crowned king, and the people rose up against Athaliah. She was dragged from the temple and executed by the guards. Athaliah is remembered as the queen who murdered her own family for the throne, a chilling example of ambition turned into bloodshed. Delilah, the woman who betrayed Samson, the man God had raised to save Israel, and who was known for his unmatched strength. Delilah was offered by the Philistine rulers a vast sum of silver if she could discover the secret of his strength, and she agreed. Day after day she pressed Samson, pretending she loved him while working for his enemies. 3 times he gave her false answers, and each time she tested him with soldiers waiting nearby. Still, Samson stayed with her, blind to her treachery, until finally he told her the truth. His strength came from his hair, a sign of his vow to God. While he slept, Delilah arranged for his hair to be cut. His strength left him, and the Philistines seized their chance. They captured him, gouged out his eyes, and led him away in chains. For money, Delilah destroyed the man who trusted her, and that's why her story is remembered as a story of greed and betrayal at its worst. Haman. He was a high official in the Persian Empire who nearly wiped.
Wait, before we go on to him, can we just talk about how stupid Samson was? This woman basically kept asking you the same question constantly, and you didn't for once think it was suspicious. Like they attacked you 3 times in the night, and still you couldn't put 2 and 2 together. But this guy that big of a simp?
Wiped out the Jewish people in one of the Bible's darkest plots. Haman's hatred began when Mordecai, who was a Jew, refused to bow before him. Enraged, he decided that killing Mordecai alone was not enough, so he planned to destroy every Jew in the empire. He convinced King Xerxes to issue a decree for their extermination, setting a date by casting lots. Across the empire, letters announced that any
This guy was the biggest hater in the entire Bible. Like, I don't even think I can imagine another hater as big as him. This guy was, just because one man refused to bow to him, he wanted all this guy and his entire all his people wiped out. Bro, what?
person of Jewish descent was to be slaughtered, regardless of age. At the same time, Haman built a massive gallows to hang Mordecai in public as a symbol of his power. But Haman's plan unraveled when Queen Esther revealed she was Jewish and exposed his scheme to the king. In a dramatic reversal, he was executed on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Haman's downfall became a warning carved into history. Those who scheme against God's people seal their own destruction. Herod the Great. The massacre of children in Bethlehem, one of the darkest acts recorded in the New Testament, was carried out by King Herod the Great. Ruling Judea at the time of Jesus' birth, he was consumed by fear of losing power. When he heard rumors of a newborn king of the Jews, he resolved to eliminate the child before he could ever grow up. Failing to learn his exact location, Herod gave a brutal order. Every baby boy in Bethlehem 2 years old and under was to be killed. Soldiers stormed homes and tore infants from their families, all to secure a throne that was never truly his. This was not the first time Herod resorted to bloodshed. History tells us he executed his own wife and sons out of paranoia. But the slaughter in Bethlehem became his most notorious crime, remembered as an attack not only on children, but on the Messiah himself. Herod died in agony soon after, and his name remains a symbol of power twisted into violence. The king who tried to murder Christ at the very beginning of his life. Herod Antipas, one of Herod the Great's sons, and ruled over Galilee during the time of Jesus. Herod Antipas, known for his weakness and corruption, killed a prophet to save face at a banquet. John had openly condemned Herod's unlawful marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife. Furious at the public rebuke, Herodias wanted John dead. Her chance came during Herod's birthday feast, where her daughter's dance pleased the ruler so much that he promised her anything she asked for. Coached by her mother, she demanded John's head on a platter. Though distressed, Herod was too proud to refuse in front of his guests.
I believe Herodias was actually the evil one here, to be honest. Because the truth is, at least Herod actually wanted to hear John out a bit because he was interested in what he had to say. But Herodias that wanted the guy dead. But then she knew that that Herod wouldn't want to kill him. That's what happened.
Gave the order, and John was executed in prison. His severed head was carried into the banquet hall as a trophy for Herodias. Herod Antipas later encountered Jesus during his trial. Instead of showing reverence, he mocked him and sent him back to Pilate dressed in a robe. His name is remembered not as a king, but as the coward who killed God's prophet and mocked God's son. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon who crushed Jerusalem and brought Judah to its knees. In 587 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar's armies stormed the city, burned the temple of God, and carried the people into exile. Those who resisted were slaughtered, and the survivors were dragged in chains to Babylon. His power seemed unstoppable, and his pride grew with it. He built a golden statue and demanded that all people bow before it. Among those who refused were 3 Jewish men who had been taken from Jerusalem and placed in Babylon's service. Because they would not worship his idol, Nebuchadnezzar ordered them thrown into a fiery furnace. Later, standing on the roof of his palace, he boasted of his own glory, claiming credit for the empire God had allowed him to rule. In judgment, God struck him with madness. Stripped of his throne, he lived like an animal in the fields until he finally looked to heaven and acknowledged God's authority. Only then was his sanity and kingdom restored. Nebuchadnezzar's story shows how far pride can drive a man into evil, and how even the mightiest tyrant can be broken when he defies the Lord. Absalom. He rebelled against his own father and nearly tore Israel apart. Absalom, handsome and ambitious, gained the trust of the people. However, he used it to fuel his pride. His first act of violence came after his sister Tamar was disgraced by their half-brother Amnon. When David failed to act, Absalom took matters into his own hands. He arranged a feast and had Amnon murdered in cold blood. Then
In case you guys don't know, Ammon actually raped his sister, and because of that, Absalom was so pissed that, well, just listen up.
fled into exile. When he returned, Absalom began winning the hearts of the people by standing at the city gate, listening to their disputes, and claiming he would give them justice if he were king. Over time, he built a following and declared himself ruler in Hebron, driving David to flee Jerusalem. To show his power, Absalom publicly slept with his father's concubines on the palace roof. The rebellion ended in battle, and as Absalom fled, his long hair caught in the branches of a tree, leaving him helplessly hanging. Despite David's plea to spare him, Joab struck him down. Absalom's story is remembered as the tragedy of a son whose pride and lust for power led him to betray his father and die in disgrace. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, who is remembered for mocking God while laying siege to Jerusalem. Sennacherib, known for his cruelty and ruthless conquests, had already destroyed many cities of Judah and forced countless captives into exile. When his army surrounded Jerusalem, he sent messengers to taunt the people and their king, Hezekiah. His officials stood before the city walls and shouted that no God had ever saved a nation from Assyria. They claimed the God of Israel was no different, daring the people to resist and mocking their faith. The message was clear: surrender or be destroyed. King Hezekiah prayed, and the prophet Isaiah declared that God himself would defend the city. That night, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in their camp. Sennacherib withdrew in defeat, humiliated after all his boasts. Later, he was assassinated by his own sons in the temple of his god. Sennacherib is remembered as the king who mocked the Lord of heaven and paid with both his army and his life. And that wraps up some of the most evil people recorded in the Bible. If this gave you a clearer look at the dark side of Scripture, give it a like, subscribe for more breakdowns on Christianity and Bible history, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next.
The reason why I think this video actually is really important is because it doesn't just it just reminds us that the Bible isn't just love your neighbor and do good to those who hate you. It's filled with some of the most vile and disgusting people to ever live, and how all of them found found out how God would how God reacted to their vileness. Basically, they fucked around with God, and they damn sure found out the hard way. Be hard.